The Founder of Demonic Cultivation. An English translation by Fan EE 33. Read by Luna Minerva. Chapter 16. Elegance, Part 7. Several cultivators rowed toward the black shadow in the water, chasing it with their nets. Elsewhere someone shouted, "It's here too!" Indeed, another shadow flitted through the water on the other side of the body of water. Several narrow boats flew toward the black silhouette, nets trailing behind them, but the nets turned up empty. Wei Wuxian said, "Strange, this shadow isn't shaped like a human. Plus, it keeps changing. Suddenly long, and then suddenly short, suddenly big, then suddenly small. Lanchan, next to your boat!" In response, Bichen flew out from the scabbard on Lan Wangji's back and pierced the water. After a moment it flew out with a sharp hiss, producing an iridescent spray. However, the sword had struck nothing. Lan Wangji gripped the sword in his hand, his expression focused and grave. Right as he was about to open his mouth, a disciple across from him sent his own sword flying, thrusting at the shadow in the river as it sped by. But after the sword went under water, it never returned. No matter how many times the disciple tried summoning it back, nothing answered. The sword seemed to have been swallowed by the lake, leaving neither a shadow nor a trace. The disciple seemed about the same age as Wei Wuxian and the other youths. After losing his sword, his face turned paler and paler. "Su She, we haven't even figured out what's in the water," an older disciple beside him said. "Why did you send your sword into the lake without permission?" Su She seemed somewhat panicked, but his expression remained calm. I saw Second Master Lan had sent his sword in." Before he had finished, he realized his words were ignorant and improper. Lan Wangji and the sword Bichen were incomparable. No matter what, others couldn't hope to match up. No matter how little he knew of the enemy he was facing, Lan Wangji would have no problem commanding his sword to fly into the water, but the same was not true for others. Crimson blotches of shame peeked through Su She's now blue-white skin. He looked at Lan Wangji as though the more talented boy had somehow insulted him, but Lan Wangji was busy scrutinizing the water and didn't notice. In a flash, Bichen flew out of its scabbard once more. This time, the blade didn't submerge itself, but instead jabbed its tip at a shadow darting by, flipping it out of the water. A lacquer black and dripping wet ball of material landed on the bottom of Lan Wangji's boat. Wei Wuxian stood on his toes, craning his head for a peek. It was a garment. He laughed so hard he risked toppling head first into the river. "Lanchan, you're amazing! In all my time clearing out water ghosts, this is the first I've seen someone pull off a ghost's clothes." Lan Wangji was busy checking Bichen's blade for any changes, apparently having already decided to ignore all of Wei Wuxian's attempts at conversation. Jiang Chang spoke. "You should shut your mouth. The thing that swam past us wasn't a water ghost. It was nothing more than a set of clothes." Of course, Wei Wuxian had seen all this perfectly clearly. Only, if he didn't needle Lan Wangji, his entire body would start feeling out of sorts. "So the thing darting back and forth just now was only a set of clothes? No wonder our nets couldn't catch it, and our swords couldn't penetrate it. Its shape keeps changing. But a set of clothes can't devour a cultivator's sword. There has to be something else in the water." By then, the boats had already floated towards the center of Lake Biling, whose water was a dark, inky green. Suddenly, Lan Wangji lifted his head slightly. "We must return immediately." "Why?" Lan Xichen said. "The creature in the water intentionally lured our boats to the center of Lake Biling." The words had barely left his lips when everyone felt the hulls of their vessels begin to sink. The water rapidly crept upward, spilling into the boats. Suddenly, Wei Wuxian realized the lake water was no longer inky green, but almost black. Out of nowhere, an immense whirlpool appeared in the center of the lake, surrounding them in all directions. The dozen or so boats began circling the whirlpool's center, dragged along by the currents, sinking deeper and deeper, as though a gigantic black mouth was sucking them down. The shinks of swords exiting their scabbards rang in peals, and one by one everyone mounted their swords. Wei Wuxian had already flown into the air when, upon bending his neck and looking down, he saw Su She, the disciple who had sent his sword into the lake, standing knee-deep in the water. The hull of his boat had already sunk beneath the water's surface. His expression was filled with panic, yet he didn't call for help. Perhaps he had been scared witless. Without thinking, Wei Wuxian bent down, extended his hand, grabbed the disciple's wrist and dragged him up as he ascended. Upon taking on the extra weight, the sword beneath Wei Wuxian's feet lurched, but it continued to soar skyward. However, not long after, something jerked Su She downwards and nearly dragged Wei Wuxian off his blade. The disciple's lower body had already been swallowed by the black whirlpool. It spun faster and faster, and he continued to sink deeper and deeper, as though something hidden beneath the water was pulling down on his legs. Mounted on Sandu, Jiang Chang had risen calmly until he was about 60 meters above the whirlpool before he looked down. Filled with displeasure at what he saw, he shouted and dove down. "What are you up to now?" The suction force inside Lake Biling grew ever stronger. Wei Wuxian's sword was optimized for agility, and consequently its strength happened to fall just short, and they were nearly pulled to the surface of the lake. Wei Wuxian steadied himself and held on to Su She with both hands. "Someone help! If I can't pull him up soon, I'll have to let go!" he shouted. Suddenly, the back of Wei Wuxian's collar tightened, and his body was lifted into the air. He twisted his neck and saw Lan Wangji holding him up with one hand. Though the boy's indifferent gaze was directed elsewhere, he and his sword alone had no trouble bearing the weight of 3 people, even fighting against the mysterious force inside the lake. They rose higher and higher at a stable pace. Slightly shocked, Jiang Chang thought, "If I had gotten to Wei Wuxian first on Sandu, I probably couldn't have flown back up so quickly and steadily, but Lan Wangji is about the same age as me." At this time, Wei Wuxian said, "Lanzhan, your sword must be pretty strong, right? Thank you. But why do you have to lift me by my collar? Can't you just pull me up normally? You're making me really uncomfortable here. How about I stick my hand out toward you and you can pull me by the arm instead?" "I do not touch strangers," Lan Wangji replied coldly. "We already know each other so well. How do I count as a stranger?" Wei Wuxian said. "We do not." Wei Wuxian feigned injury at his words. "Ugh, you're unbelievable." Jiang Chang could no longer endure his disciple brother's behavior. "You're unbelievable," he roared. "Can't you talk a little less when someone's dangling you by the collar in midair?" Swiftly, the group fled Lake Biling on their swords, landing on the shore. Lan Wangji relaxed his right hand and released his grip on Wei Wuxian's collar, turned unhurriedly and spoke to Lan Xichen. "This is an aquatic abyss." Lan Xichen nodded. "This will be a thorny problem." As soon as the words aquatic abyss were uttered, Wei Wuxian and Jiang Chang understood. The most frightening thing in Lake Biling and the adjoining rivers wasn't some water ghost, but the flowing water itself. Because of the terrain or the way the current naturally moved, some rivers and lakes were frequent sites of shipwrecks or people falling overboard. Over time, such areas would grow a personality and become spoiled. Just as a pampered princess expected her silks, feasts, and jewelry, that region of water would start expecting sacrifices of cargo ships and human bodies at regular intervals. If it didn't receive them, it would attempt to acquire them itself. The people of Tsai town and the surrounding regions were good swimmers who knew the waters well, so drownings and shipwrecks in the area had always been rare. Consequently, the waters nearby couldn't possibly have produced an aquatic abyss. Its appearance here could have only one explanation. It was chased here from somewhere else. Once an aquatic abyss was formed, all the water within the area transformed into a single, highly tenacious monster. The only way to get rid of it was to suck the lake or river dry, clear it of all people and objects that had sunk in the water, and expose the lake or river bed to harsh sunlight for 3 to 5 years. Thus, these things were nearly impossible to eliminate. However, there was another way to rid oneself of the problem for a while, at others' expense: chase it away to another body of water, allowing it to bring disaster to some place else.
Have any places been disturbed by aquatic abysses recently?
Lan Wangji asked. Lan Xichen pointed skywards. He was pointing at none other than the sun. Wei Wuxian and Jiang Chang exchanged glances and thought. The Qishan Wen clan. Sects of cultivation, big and small, were scattered over the land like countless stars in the night sky. However, there was one among them which loomed above the rest like a colossus: the Qishan Wen clan. The Wen clan took the sun as their symbol to signify that they contended with the sun in radiance and matched it in longevity. Their seat was as vast as a city and was named the Nightless Heavens. It was also sometimes called the Nightless Capital. It was said that, indeed, night never fell upon the city, and it was named a colossus because regardless of how many disciples other sects had, or how powerful they were, or the land they occupied, or the weapons they owned, the Qishan Wen clan left them all in the dust. It was entirely unrivaled. Many cultivators even viewed entering the clan as a guest disciple as among the highest of honors. Based on their way of doing things, they were very likely to be the ones who had chased the aquatic abyss here. Though everyone now knew the origin of the lake haunting, they kept silent. If it had been the Wen clan's doing, nothing could be done about it, regardless of how many condemnations people levied or accusations they hurled. Firstly, that clan would never acknowledge the wrongdoing, and secondly, it would never offer any form of reparation. One disciple fumed. By driving the aquatic abyss here, it's like that other clan is trying to bring disaster to Cai town. If it grows bigger and enters the town rivers and canals, so many people will be risking their lives every day living on top of a monster. It's... Having become the recipient of someone else's discarded problem, the Guosulan clan would, from this point on, be forced into the tiresome and unending task of dealing with it themselves. Lan Xichen sighed and said, forget it. Let us return." They boarded new boats at the ferry crossing and rowed toward the busiest part of town. As their vessels passed under the arch bridge and into the river channel, Wei Wuxian began to act up again. He cast his bamboo pole aside, set his foot on the side of his boat, and, using the water as a mirror, examined his hair to see if it had gotten messy. As though he hadn't just fought water ghosts and fled from the mouth of a watery abyss, he calmly and confidently shot flirtatious smiles at the river's two shores. "Sisters, how much for half a kilo of loquats?" He was very young and had a bright, dashing appearance that glowed with vitality and spirit. Veritably a frolicking peach blossom chasing after the flow of the river. A smile bloomed on the face of a woman nearby, and she pulled up her bamboo hat. "Oh, you little charmer! How about I give you one free of charge?" The notes of Wu in her voice were pure, sweet, and soft, like sticky rice. From her lips sprang touching melodies, filling the ears of those who listened with fragrance. Wei Wuxian cupped his hands and said, "Naturally, anything sister wishes to give to me, I want." The woman reached into her basket and felt for a round golden loquat, which she tossed toward him. "No need to be polite. It's for your good looks." Swiftly the boats sailed toward each other, the hulls brushing by as they passed. Wei Wuxian turned, caught the loquat head-on, and grinned. "You're even more pretty!" As he deluged the townsfolk with flowery words, flitting all over the place like a bee or butterfly, Lan Wangji gazed resolutely ahead, the picture of noble character and unimpeachable integrity. Gleefully tossing the loquat around in his hands, Wei Wuxian suddenly pointed at him.
Sisters, do you think he's handsome?
Lan Wangji had entirely failed to anticipate that he would suddenly be pulled into the conversation and had no idea how to respond. The women on the river spoke in harmony.
He's even more handsome.
A smattering of male laughter seemed to be mixed within the chorus.
Then who's gonna give him a loquat? If you give one to me but not him, I'm afraid he'll be jealous.
The entire river rippled with sounds of chirping, crackling laughter. Ahead, another woman rowed toward him and said,
All right. I'll give you a second. Eat mine. Here, Chama, catch!
The second loquat fell into Wei Wuxian's hands, and he shouted,
Sister is beautiful and has a good heart. Next time I come here, I'll buy some. I'll buy a whole basket.
The woman's voice was bright and glittering, and she was bold. Pointing at Lan Wangji, she said,
Make him come too. Come buy my loquats together.
Wei Wuxian stuck the recently gifted loquat in front of Lan Wangji's eyes. The boy stared levelly ahead.
Take it away.
I just knew you wouldn't want it, so I wasn't planning on giving it to you in the first place,
Wei Wuxian said, removing the fruit from Lan Wangji's face.
Jiang Chang, catch!
Jiang Chang swept by on another boat, just at the right time, and caught the loquat in one hand. His face cracked into a slight smile, but soon after he snorted.
Preening and flirting again?
Go away,
Wei Wuxian said, as pleased with himself as the fragrant spring breeze. He then turned.
Lan Zhan, since you're from Gusu, you can also speak the local dialect, right? How about you teach me how to curse at someone in the Gusu tongue?
Lan Wangji tossed a ridiculous at him and boarded a different boat. Wei Wuxian hadn't held any hopes of him actually replying. It was only that he found the lilting tones of the locals highly amusing, and it occurred to him that Lan Wangji must also have spoken a similar dialect since he was young. It was fun to tease him about it, that was all. Wei Wuxian tilted his head upward and drank a gulp of glutinous rice wine. Then, carrying the shiny, round black jar, he pushed on his bamboo pole and went to fool around with Jiang Chang. Meanwhile, Lan Wangji and Lan Xichen stood side by side, their expressions even looking somewhat similar this time. Both of their hearts seemed heavy and their minds troubled. They pondered the answers to the challenges the aquatic abyss posed, and how they would explain things to the mayor of Cai town, and the many resulting arrangements they would have to make. From up ahead, a cargo boat laden with basket upon basket of golden loquats floated towards them. Lan Wangji glanced at it, before again staring fixedly forward. But Lan Xichen said, "Since you want to eat some loquats, why don't we buy a basket and take it home?"
I do not want any.
Lan Wangji brushed something off his sleeve and moved away. Once again, he changed boats.